Hi.
And good evening. Welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. Good evening. How are you doing? Yeah, there's JJ. And here's Kimmy. She's going to tell us what her picture's about.
There's Daniel with his Rubik's Cube. Do you like it?
I don't think Becca's on yet.
Tell in the comments. Tell in the
I don't think
comments
Becca's
if you
there
like
yet.
it. Tell in the comments if you like it. We can wait for Becca to get here.
Yeah, she's... Comment moderation? What does that mean? Only your followers be able to leave comments. Comments will only be able to comment every 10 seconds. Oh, there she is. Yay!
Yeah.
Hi, Rebecca.
Look at this.
We want to know in the comments how you like me.
You don't have to say it on the chat.
All your pictures are really nice.
Thank you, Becca.
Yay.
I got a 3D one. Da da da. That's not a picture.
Okay, so today is the 21st. We did not have our story time yesterday, so we have to catch up with Proverbs. We are about a little over a week away from the end of Proverbs. So I just wanted to let you guys know. Oh, that is too bright. Is this better? I'm just afraid that this is too dark for me to read. Rebecca says, I love the swan. Thank you, Rebecca. So we're going to continue reading one chapter from the Bible every night before we start our reading time. But I want to know in the comments what book that you think would be a good book to read. JJ, stop. What you think would be a good book to read. So if you let me know, you don't have to comment right now, but just think it over. Maybe you tell me in a message, and that would be fine. Okay, and no guarantees, because I might make an executive decision and just decide something that nobody else wants to read. Joel or something, who knows. Okay, so this is Proverbs chapter 20 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. Wine is a mocker, strong drink a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. The terror of a king is like the growling of a lion. Whoever provokes him to anger forfeits his life. It is an honor for a man to keep aloof from strife, but every fool will be quarreling. The sluggard does not plow in the autumn, he will seek at harvest and have nothing. The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find? Okay, we need to settle down, stop talking, we need to lay down or sit down while I'm reading, right?
Yes, sir.
JJ's just all over the place. The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him. A king who sits on the throne of judgment winnows all evil with his eyes. Who can say, I have made my heart pure, I am clean from my sin? Unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Even a child makes himself known by his acts, by whether his conduct is pure and upright. The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. Love not sleep, lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you will have plenty of bread. Bad, bad, says the buyer, but when he goes away, then he boasts. There is gold and abundance of costly stones, but the lips of knowledge are a precious jewel. Take a man's garment when he has put up security for a stranger, and hold it in pledge when he puts up security for foreigners. Bread gained by deceit is sweet to a man, but afterward his mouth will be full of gravel. Plans are established by counsel, by wise guidance wage war. By wise guidance wage war. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, therefore do not associate with a simple babbler. If one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness. An inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. Do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will deliver you. Unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales are not good. A man's steps are from the Lord. How then can man understand his way? It is a snare to say rashly, it is holy, and to reflect only after making vows. A wise king winnows the wicked and drives the wheel over them. The spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all his innermost parts. Steadfast love and faithfulness preserve the king, and by steadfast love his throne is upheld. The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair. Blows that wound cleanse away evil. Strokes make clean the innermost parts. This is chapter 21. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, are sin. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a snare of death. The violence of the wicked will sweep them away because they refuse to do what is just. The way of the guilty is crooked, but the conduct of the pure is upright. It is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no mercy in his eyes. When a scoffer is punished, the simple becomes wise. When a wise man is instructed, he gains knowledge. The righteous one observes the house of the wicked. He throws the wicked down to ruin. Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered. A gift in secret averts anger, and a concealed bribe strong wrath. When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. One who wanders from the way of good sense will rest in the assembly of the dead. Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. The wicked is a ransom for the righteous, and the traitor for the upright. It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life. Sorry, I lost my place. Whoever pursues righteousness and kindness will find life, righteousness, and honor. A wise man scales the city of the mighty and brings down the stronghold in which they trust. Whoever keeps his mouth and his tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. The desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. All day long he craves and craves, but the righteous gives and does not hold back. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination, how much more when he brings it with evil intent. A false witness will perish, but the word of a man who hears will endure. A wicked man puts on a bold face, but the upright gives thought to his ways. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. That was Psalms 20 and 21. Again, we missed our reading yesterday, so in order to finish the book of Psalms on time, I went ahead and read 2 verses. So I hope y'all are enjoying the book of Psalms. I'm going to give a quick synopsis of the silver chair. And basically, we have a girl named Jill who is being bullied. We have a boy named Eustace who we met in the last book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And Eustace was talking about the magical land of Narnia when they decided to ask Aslan to bring them there, and then he did bring them there. They wound up being on a hill or a cliff, and it was really, really long way down. And somehow there was it was sort of an accident, but sort of like being careless. Jill pushed him down, and Aslan blew him to safety. And then Jill met Aslan. He gave her the instructions, and then he blew her to Narnia, and that's where we are. And she is, I don't know if she's landed yet, but she sees, yeah, okay, Kimmy says she landed, and Eustace is there. Okay, chapter 3, the sailing of the king. What made Scrub look so dingy, and Jill too, if she could only have seen herself, was the splendor of their surroundings. I'd better describe them at once. Are we settling in the other room? AJ? Okay. Through a cleft in the mountains, which Jill had seen far inland as she approached the land, the sunset light was pouring over a level lawn. On the far side of the lawn, its weather vanes glittering in the light, rose a many-towered and many-turreted castle, the most beautiful castle Jill had ever seen. And if she lives in England, she's probably seen some beautiful castles, but I know that we living in America don't typically see castles very often, unless we live in Germany for 3.5 years, and then we see castles while we're there. On the near side was a quay of white marble, and moored to this, the ship, a tall ship with high forecastle and high poop, gilded and crimson, with a great flag at the masthead and many banners waving from the decks, and a row of shields bright as silver along the bulwarks. The gangplank was laid to her, and at the foot of it, just ready to go on board, stood an old man. He wore a rich mantle of scarlet, which opened in front to show his silver mail shirt. There was a thin circlet of gold on his head. His beard, white as wool, fell nearly to his waist. He stood straight enough, leaning one hand to the other of a richly dressed lord who seemed younger than himself, but you could see he was very old and very frail. He looked as if a puff of wind could blow him away, and his eyes were watery. I'm going to show you a picture. Here is a ship and a castle. Trying to center it in the picture. There we are. Immediately in front of the king, who had turned round to speak to his people before going on board the ship, there was a little chair on wheels, and harnessed to it a little donkey, not much bigger than a big retriever. In this chair sat a fat little dwarf. He was as richly dressed as the king, but because of his fatness and because he was sitting hunched up among the cushions, the effect was quite different. It made him look like a shapeless little bundle of fur and silk and velvet. He was as old as the king, but more hale and hearty, with very keen eyes. His bare head, which was bald and extremely large, shone like a gigantic billiard ball in the sunset light. Farther back, in a half circle, stood what Jill at once knew to be the courtiers. They were well worth looking at for their clothing and armor alone. As far as that went, they looked more like a flower bed than a crowd. But what really made Jill open her eyes and mouth as wide as they would go was the people themselves, if people was the right word, for only about 1 in every 5 was human. The rest were things you never see in our world: fauns, satyrs, centaurs. Jill could give a name to these, for she had seen pictures of them. Dwarfs, too, and there were a lot of animals she knew as well: bears, badgers, moles, leopards, mice, and various birds. But then they were so very different from the animals which one called by the same names in England. Some of them were much bigger. The mice, for instance, stood on their hind legs and were over 2 feet high. But quite apart from that, they all looked different. You could see by the expression in their faces that they could talk and think just as well as you could. Golly, thought Jill, so it's true after all. But next moment she added, I wonder, are they friendly? For she had just noticed on the outskirts of the crowd 1 or 2 giants and some people whom she couldn't give a name to at all. At that moment Aslan and the signs rushed back to her mind. She had forgotten all about them for the last half hour. Scrub, she whispered, grabbing his arm. Scrub, quick! You see anyone you know? So you've turned up again, have you? Said Scrub disagreeably, for which he had some reason. Well, keep quiet, can't you? I want to listen. Don't be a fool, said Jill. There isn't a moment to lose. Don't you see some old friend here? Because you've got to go and speak to him at once. What are you talking about? Said Scrub. It's Aslan, the lion. Says you've got to, said Jill despairingly. I've seen him. Oh, you have you? What did he say? He said the very first person you saw in Narnia would be an old friend, and you'd got to speak to him at once. Well, there's nobody here I've ever seen in my life before, and anyway, I don't know whether this is Narnia. Thought you said you'd been here before, said Jill. Well, you thought wrong then. Well, I like that. You told me. For heaven's sake, dry up and let's hear what they're saying. The king was speaking to the dwarf, but Jill couldn't hear what he said, and as far as she could make out, the dwarf made no answer, though he nodded and wagged his head a great deal. Then the king raised his voice and addressed the whole court, but his voice was so old and cracked that she could understand very little of his speech, especially since it was all about people and places she'd never heard of. When the speech was over, the king stooped down and kissed the dwarf on both cheeks, straightened himself, raised his right hand as if in blessing, and went slowly and with feeble steps up the gangway and on board the ship. The courtiers appeared to be greatly moved by his departure. Handkerchiefs were got out, sounds of sobbing were heard in every direction. The gangway was cast off, trumpets sounded from the poop, and the ship moved away from the quay. It was being towed by a rowing boat, but Jill didn't see that. Now, said Scrub, but he didn't get any further, because at that very moment a large white object, Jill thought for a second that it was a kite, came gliding through the air and alighted at his feet. It was a white owl, but so big that it stood as high as a good-sized dwarf. It blinked and peered as if it were short-sighted, and put its head a little to one side, and said in a soft, hooting voice, "Too, too, who are you too?" "My name's Scrub, and this is Pull," said Eustace. "Would you mind telling us where we are?" "In the land of Narnia, at the king's castle of Cair Paravel." "Is that the king who's just taken ship?" Too true, said the owl sadly, shaking its big head. "But who are you? There's something magic about you too. I saw you arrive, you flew. Everyone else was so busy seeing the king off that nobody knew except me. I happened to notice you flew." "We were sent here by Aslan," said Eustace in a low voice. "To who?" said the owl, ruffling out his feathers. "This is almost too much for me. So early in the evening I'm not quite myself till the sun's down." "And we've been sent to find the lost prince," said Jill, who's been anxiously waiting to get into the conversation. "The first I've heard about it," said Eustace. "What prince?" "You had better come and speak to the Lord Regent at once," it said. Oh, sorry, that's the owl. "That's him over there in the donkey carriage, Trumpkin the dwarf." The bird turned and began leading the way, muttering to itself, "Woo! To-hoo! What a to-do! I can't think clearly yet. It's too early." "What is the king's name?" asked Eustace. "Caspian the 10th," said the owl, and Jill wondered why Scrub had suddenly pulled up short in his walk and turned an extraordinary colour. She thought she had never seen him look so sick about anything, but before she had time to ask any questions they had reached the dwarf, who was just gathering up the reins of his donkey and preparing to drive back to the castle. The crowd of courtiers had broken up and were going in the same direction by ones and twos and little knots like people coming away from watching a game or a race. "To-hoo! Ahem! Lord Regent," said the owl, stooping down a little and holding its beak near the dwarf's ear. "Eh? What's that?" said the dwarf. "Two strangers, my lord," said the owl. "Rangers? What do you mean?" said the dwarf. "I see two uncommonly grubby man-cubs. What do they want?" "My name's Jill," said Jill, pressing forward. She was very eager to explain the important business on which they had come. "The girl's called Jill," said the owl, as loud as it could. "What's that?" said the dwarf. "The girls are all killed? I don't believe a word of it. What girls? Who killed them?" "Only one girl, my lord," said the owl. "Her name is Jill." Speak up, said the dwarf. "Don't stand there buzzing and twittering in my ear. Who's been killed?" "Nobody's been killed," hooted the owl. "Who? Nobody." All right, you needn't shout. I'm not so deaf as all that. What do you mean by coming here to tell me that nobody's been killed? Why should anyone have been killed?" "Better tell him I'm Eustace," said Scrub. "The boy's Eustace, my lord," hooted the owl, as loud as it could. "Useless?" said the dwarf irritably. "I dare say he is. Is that any reason for bringing him to court? Hey, not useless," said the owl. "Eustace." "Used to be, is he? I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sure. I tell you what it is, Master Glimfeather. When I was a young dwarf, there used to be talking beasts and birds in this country who could really talk. There wasn't all this mumbling and muttering and whispering. It wouldn't have been tolerated for a moment. Not for a moment, sir. Erin's my trumpet, please." A little fawn, who had been standing quietly beside the dwarf's elbow all this time, now handed him a silver ear trumpet. It was made like the musical instrument called a serpent, so that the tube curled right around the dwarf's neck. While he was getting it settled, the owl Glimfeather suddenly said to the children in a whisper, "My brain's a bit clearer now. Don't say anything about the lost prince. I'll explain later. It wouldn't do, to-hoo. Oh, what a to-do!" "Now," said the dwarf, "if you have anything sensible to say, Master Glimfeather, try and say it. Take a deep breath, and don't attempt to speak too quickly." With help from the children, and in spite of a fit of coughing on the part of the dwarf, Glenfeather explained that the strangers had been sent by Aslan to visit the court of Narnia. The dwarf glanced quickly up at them with a new expression in his eyes. "Sent by the lion himself, eh?" he said. "And from that other place, beyond the world's end, eh?" "Yes, my lord," bawled Eustace into the trumpet. "Son of Adam and daughter of Eve, hey?" said the dwarf, but people at Experiment House hadn't heard of Adam and Eve, so Jill and Eustace couldn't answer this, but the dwarf didn't seem to notice. "Well, my dears," he said, taking first one and then the other by the hand, and bowing his head a little, "you are very heartily welcome. If the good king, my poor master, had not this very hour set sail for the 7 Isles, he would have been glad of your coming. It would have brought back his youth to him for a moment. And now it is high time for supper. You shall tell me your business in full council tomorrow morning. Master Glimfeather, see that bedchambers and suitable clothes and all else are provided for these guests in the most honourable fashion, and Glimfeather, in your ear—" Here the dwarf put his mouth close to the owl's head, and, no doubt, intended to whisper, but like other deaf people, he wasn't a very good judge of his own voice, and both children heard him say, "See that they're properly washed." After that, the dwarf touched up his donkey and set off toward the castle at something between a trot and a waddle. It was a very fat little beast, while the fawn, the owl, and the children followed at a rather slower pace. The sun had set and the air was growing cool. They went across the lawn and then through an orchard, and so to the north gate of Cair Paravel, which stood wide open. Inside they found a grassy courtyard. Lights were already showing from the windows of the great hall on the right and from a more complicated mass of buildings straight ahead. Into these the owl led them, and there a most delightful person was called to look after Jill. He was not much taller than Jill herself, and a good deal slenderer, but obviously full grown, graceful as a willow, and her hair was willowy too, and there seemed to be moss in it. She brought Jill to a round room in one of the turrets, where there was a little bath sunk in the floor, and a fire of sweet-smelling woods burning on the flat hearth, and a lamp hanging by a silver chain from a vaulted roof. The window looked west into the strange land of Narnia, and Jill saw the red remains of the sunset still glowing behind distant mountains. It made her long for more adventures, and feel sure that this was only the beginning. When she had had her bath and brushed her hair, and put on the clothes that had been laid out for her, they were the kind that not only felt nice, but looked nice and smelled nice and made nice sounds when you moved as well. She would have gone back to gaze out of that exciting window, but she was interrupted by a bang on the door. "Come in," said Jill, and in came Scrub, along also bathed and splendidly dressed in Narnian clothes. But his face didn't look as if he were enjoying it. "Oh, here you are at last," he said crossly, flinging himself into a chair. "I've been trying to find you for ever so long." "Well, now you have," said Jill. "I say, Scrub, isn't it all simply too exciting and scrumptious for words?" He had forgotten all about the signs and the lost prince for the moment. "Oh, that's what you think, is it?" said Scrub, and then after a pause, "I wish to goodness we'd never come." "Why on earth?" "I can't bear it," said Scrub. "Seeing that King Caspian, a doddering old man like that, it's frightful." "Why, what harm does it do you?" "Oh, you don't understand. Now that I come to think of it, you couldn't. I didn't tell you that this world had different time from ours." "How do you mean?" "The time you spend here doesn't take up any of our time. Don't you see? I mean, however long we spend here, we shall still get back to Experiment House at the same moment we left it." "Oh, that won't be too much fun." "Oh, dry up. Don't keep interrupting. And when you're back in England, in our world, you can't tell how time is going here. It might be any number of years in Narnia while we're having 1 year at home. The Pevensies explained it all to me, but like a fool, I forgot all about it. And now apparently it's been about 70 years, Narnian years, since I was here last. Do you see now? And I come back and find Caspian an old, old man." "Then the king was an old friend of yours," said Jill. A horrid thought had struck her. "I should jolly well think he was," said Scrub miserably. "About as good a friend as a chap could have, and last time he was only a few years older than me, and to see that old man with a white beard, and to remember Caspian as he was the morning we captured the Lone Islands, or in the fight with the sea serpent, oh, it's frightful. It's worse than coming back and finding him dead." "Oh, shut up," said Jill impatiently. "It's far worse than you think. We've muffled the first sign." Of course, Scrub did not understand this. Then Jill told him about her conversation with Aslan and the 4 signs and the task of finding the lost prince which had been laid upon them. "So you see," she wound up, "you did see an old friend just as Aslan said, and you ought to have gone and spoken to him at once. And now you haven't, and everything is going wrong from the very beginning." "But how was I to know?" said Scrub. "If you'd only listened to me when I tried to tell you, we'd be all right," said Jill. "Yes, and if you hadn't played the fool on the edge of that cliff and jolly near murdered me—" "All right, I said murder, and I'll say it again as often as I like. So keep your hair on. We'll have to come together and both known we'd have come together and both known what to do." I suppose he was the very first person you saw, said Jill. You must have been here hours before me. Are you sure you didn't see anyone else first? I was only here about a minute before you, said Scrub. He must have blown you quicker than me, making up for lost time, the time you lost. Don't be a perfect beast, Scrub, said Jill. Hello, what's that? It was the castle bell ringing for supper, and thus what looked like turning into a first-rate quarrel was happily cut short. Both had a good appetite by this time. Supper in the great hall of the castle was the most splendid thing either of them had ever seen, for though Eustace had been in that world before, he had spent his whole visit at sea, and knew nothing of the glory and courtesy of the Narnians at home in their own land. The banners hung from the roof, and each course came in with trumpets and kettle-drums. There were soups that would make your mouth water to think of, and the lovely fishes called pavenders, and venison, and peacock, and pies, and ices, and jellies, and fruits, and nuts, and all manner of wines and fruit drinks. Even Eustace cheered up and admitted that it was something like. And when all the serious eating and drinking was over, a blind poet came forward and struck up the grand old tale of Prince Cor and the Avarice, and the horse Bree, which is called The Horse and His Boy, and tells of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Calormen, and the lands between in the Golden Age when Peter was High King in Cair Paravel. I haven't time to tell it now, though it is well worth hearing. When they were dragging themselves upstairs to bed, yawning their heads off, Jill said, I bet we sleep well tonight, for it had been a full day, which just shows how little anyone knows what is going to happen to them next. Every time I hear this part of the story, it makes me super sad. Because he didn't get to see Caspian. And, well, he was a stick in the mud, but also he didn't know who he was. I don't know. Justify. Yeah. So, okay, so Parliament of Owls. Okay, chapter 4. Unless, does anybody think that it's time to stop? I don't think she's commenting. Okay, so we'll just keep going. All right, Daniel, you awake? JJ, you awake? All right, I got 2 bananas in the background there. All right, chapter 4, A Parliament of Owls. It's a very funny thing that the sleepier you are, the longer you take about getting to bed, especially if you are lucky enough to have a fire in your room. Jill felt she couldn't even start undressing unless she sat down in front of the fire for a bit first. And once she had sat down, she didn't want to get up again. She had already said to herself about 5 times, I must go to bed, when she was startled by a tap on the window. She got up, pulled the curtain, and at first saw nothing but darkness. Then she jumped and started backward, for something very large had dashed itself against the window, giving a sharp tap on the glass as it did so. A very unpleasant idea came into her head. Suppose they have giant moths in this country. Ugh! But then the thing came back, and this time she was about almost sure she had saw a beak, and that the beak had made the tapping noise. It's some huge bird, thought Jill. Could it be an eagle? She didn't very much want a visit even from an eagle, but she opened the window and looked out. Instantly, with a great whirring noise, the creature alighted on the window-sill and stood there, filling up the whole window, so that Jill had to step back to make room for it. It was the owl. Hush, hush, too-hoo, too-hoo, said the owl. Don't make a noise now. Are you two really in earnest about what you've got to do? About the lost prince, you mean, said Jill. Yes, we've got to be, for now she remembered the lion's voice and face, which she had nearly forgotten during the feasting and storytelling in the hall. Good, said the owl. Then there's no time to waste. You must get away from here at once. I'll go and wake the other human. Then I'll come back for you. You'd better change those court clothes and put on something you can travel in. I'll be back in 2 twos. Too-hoo! and without waiting for an answer, he was gone. If Jill had been more used to adventures, she might have doubted the owl's word, but this never occurred to her, and in the exciting idea of a midnight escape, she forgot her sleepiness. She changed back into her sweater and shorts. There was a guide's knife on the belt of the shorts, which might come in useful, and added a few things that had been left in the room for her by the girl with the willowy hair. She chose a short cloak that came down to her knees and had a hood, just the thing if it rained, she thought, a few handkerchiefs and a comb. Then she sat down and waited. She was getting sleepy again when the owl returned. "Now we're ready," it said. "You'd better lead the way," said Jill. "I don't know all the passages yet." "Too-hoo," said the owl. "We're not going through the castle. That would never do. You must ride on me. We shall fly." "Oh," said Jill, and stood with her mouth open, not very much liking the idea. Shan't I be far too heavy for you?" "Too-hoo, too-hoo, don't you be a fool. I've already carried the other one. Now, but we'll put out the lamp first." As soon as the lamp was out, the bit of night which you saw through the window looked less dark, no longer black, but gray. The owl stood on the window-sill with his back to the room and raised his wings. Jill had to climb onto his short, fat body and get her knees under the wings and grip tight. The feathers felt beautifully warm and soft, but there was nothing to hold on by. "I wonder how Scrub liked his ride," thought Jill, and just as she was thinking this, with a horrid plunge they had left the window-sill, and the wings were making a flurry round her ears, and the night's air rather cool and damp and flying in her face. There's the picture of her flying on the owl. Hey, I was actually just thinking, Kimmy, if you want to see the pictures, you could follow along on your phone with the sound off. It's just a thought I had. It was much lighter than she expected, and though the sky was overcast, one patch of watery silver showed where the moon was hiding above the clouds. The fields beneath her looked gray and the trees black. There was a certain amount of wind, a hushing, ruffling sort of wind, which meant that rain was coming soon. The owl wheeled round so that the castle was now ahead of them. Very few of the windows showed lights. They flew right over it, northward crossing the river. The air grew colder, and Jill thought she could see the white reflection of the owl in the water beneath her. But soon they were on the north bank of the river, flying above wooded country. The owl snapped at something which Jill couldn't see. "Oh, don't, please," said Jill. "Don't jerk like that. You nearly threw me off." "I beg your pardon," said the owl. "I was just nabbing a bat. There's nothing so sustaining in a small way as a nice plump little bat. Shall I catch you one, too?" "No, thanks," said Jill with a shudder. He was flying a little lower now, and a large black-looking object was looming up toward them. Jill had just time to see that it was a tower, a partly ruinous tower with a lot of ivy on it, she thought, when she found herself ducking to avoid the archway of the window, as the owl squeezed with her through the ivied, cobwebby opening, out of the fresh grey night, into a dark place inside the top of the tower. It was rather fusty inside, and the moment she slipped off the owl's back, she knew, as one usually does somehow, that it was quite crowded, and when voices began saying out of the darkness from every direction, "Too-hoo, too-hoo," she knew it was crowded with owls. She was rather relieved when the very different voice said, "Is that you, Pole?" "Is that you, Scrub?" said Jill. "No," said Glimfeather. "I think we're all here. Let's hold a parliament of owls." "Too-hoo, too-hoo, go for you, that's the right thing to do," said several voices. "Half a moment," said Scrub's voice. "There's something I want to say first." "Do, do, do, do," said the owls, and Jill said, "Fire ahead." "I suppose all you chaps, owls I mean," said Scrub, "I suppose all you know that King Caspian X, in his young days, sailed to the eastern end of the world. Well, I was with him on that journey, with him and Reepicheep the mouse, and the Lord Drinian and all of them. I know it sounds hard to believe, but people don't grow older in our world at the same speed as they do in yours. And what I want to say is this, that I'm the king's man, and if this parliament of owls is any sort of plot against the king, I'll have nothing to do with it. Too, too, we're all the king's owls too, said the owls. What's it all about then? Said Scrub. It's only this, said Glimfeather, that if the Lord Regent, the dwarf Trumpkin, hears you are going to look for the lost prince, he won't let you start. He'll keep you under lock and key sooner. Great Scott, said Scrub, you don't mean that Trumpkin is a traitor? I used to hear a lot about him in the old days at sea. Caspian the king, I mean, trusted him absolutely. Oh, no, said the voice. Trumpkin's no traitor, but more than 30 champions, knights, centaurs, good giants, and all sorts have at one time or another set out to look for the lost prince, and none of them have ever come back. And at last the king said he was not going to have all the bravest Narnians destroyed in the search for his son, and now nobody is allowed to go. But certainly has to let us go, said Scrub, when he knows who I was and who had sent me. Sent both of us, put in Jill. Yes, said Glimfeather, I think very likely he would, but the king's away, and Trumpkin will stick to the rules. He's as true as steel, but he's deaf as a post and very peckery. You could never make him see that this might be the time for making an exception to the rule. You might think he'd take some notice of us, because we're owls, and everyone knows how wise owls are, said someone else. But he's old now. He'd only say, you're a mere chick. I remember when you were an egg. Don't come trying to teach me, sir. Crabs and crumpets. This owl imitated Trumpkin's voice rather well, and there were sounds of owlish laughter all around. The children began to see that the Narnians all felt about Trumpkin as people feel at school about some crusty teacher whom everyone is a little afraid of and everyone makes fun of and nobody really dislikes. How long is the king going to be away? Asked Scrub. If only we knew, said Glimfeather. You see, there has been a rumour lately that Aslan himself has been seen in the islands in Terabithia, I think it was, and the king said he would make one more attempt before he died to see Aslan face to face again and ask his advice about who is to be king after him. But we're all afraid of that. If he doesn't meet Aslan in Terabithia, he'll go on east to Seven Isles and Lone Islands, and on and on. He never talks about it, but we all know he has never forgotten that voyage to the world's end. I'm sure in his heart of hearts he wants to go there again. Then there's no good waiting for him to come back, said Jill. No, no good, said the owl. Oh, what to do! If only you two had known and spoken to him at once! He'd have arranged everything, probably given you an army to go with you in search of the prince. Jill kept quiet at this and hoped Scrub would be sporting enough not to tell all the owls why this hadn't happened. He was, or very nearly. That is, he only muttered under his breath, well, it wasn't my fault, before saying out loud, very well, we'll have to manage without it. But there's just one thing more I want to know. If the owls' parliament, as you call it, is all fair and above board and means no mischief, why does it have to be so jolly secret, meeting in a ruin in the dead of night and all that? Too, too, hooted several owls. Where should we meet? And when would anyone meet except night? You see, exclaimed Glimfeather, most of us creatures in Narnia have such unnatural habits. They do things by day in broad blazing sunlight, oh, when everyone ought to be asleep. And as a result, at night they're so blind and stupid that you can't get a word out of them. So we owls have got into the habit of meeting at sensible hours, on our own, when we want to talk about things. I see, said Scrub. Well now, let's get on. Tell us about the lost prince." Then an old owl, not Glimfeather, related this story. About 10 years ago it appeared, when Rilian, the son of Caspian, was a very young knight. He rode with the queen, his mother, on a May morning in the north parts of Narnia. They had many squires and ladies with them, and all wore garlands of fresh leaves on their heads and horns at their sides, but they had no hounds with them, for they were maying, not hunting. In the warm part of the day they came to a pleasant glade, where a fountain flowed freshly out of the earth, and there they dismounted and ate and drank and were merry. After a time the queen felt sleepy, and they spread cloaks for her on the grassy bank. And Prince Rilian, with where did I get that? With the rest of the party, went a little way from her, that their tales and laughter might not wake her. And so, presently, a great serpent came out of the thick wood and stung the queen in her hand. All heard her cry out and rushed toward her, and Rilian was first at her side. He saw the worm gliding away from her, and made after it with his sword drawn. It was a great shining and as green as poison, so that he could see it well, but it glided away into thick bushes, and he could not come at it. So he returned to his mother, and found them all busy about her. But they were busy in vain, for at the first glance of her face Rilian knew that no physic in the world would do her good. As long as the life was in her, she seemed to be trying hard to tell him something, but she could not speak clearly, and whatever her message was, she died without delivering it. It was then hardly 10 minutes since they had first heard her cry. It was then hardly 10. Okay, so it was 10 minutes late. It took 10 minutes for that to happen. They carried the dead queen back to Cair Paravel, and she was bitterly mourned by Rilian and by the king and by all Narnia. She had been a great lady, wise and gracious and happy, King Caspian's bride, whom he had brought home from the eastern end of the world. We all remember who that is? The Star's daughter, that's right. The end of the world. And men said that the blood of the stars flowed in her veins. The prince took his mother's death very hardly, and well he might. After that he was always riding on the northern marches of Narnia, hunting for that venomous worm to kill it and be avenged. No one remarked much on this, though the prince came home from these wanderings looking tired and distraught. But about a month after the queen's death, some said they could see a change in him. There was a look in his eyes as a man who has seen visions, and though he would be out all day, his horse did not bear signs of hard riding. His chief friend among the other courtiers was the Lord Drinian, he who had been his father's captain on that great voyage to the east parts of the world. One evening Drinian said to the prince, "Your highness must soon give over seeking the worm. There is no true vengeance on the witless brute as there might be on a man. You weary yourself in vain." The prince answered him, "My lord, I have almost forgotten the worm these 7 days." Drinian asked him why, if that were so, he rode so continuously in the northern woods. "My lord," said the prince, "I have seen that there is the most beautiful thing that was ever made." "Fair prince," said Drinian, "of your courtesy let me ride with you tomorrow, that I may see this fair thing." "With a good will," said Rilian. Then, in good time on the next day, they saddled their horses and rode a great gallop into the northern woods, and alighted at the same fountain where the queen got her death. Drinian thought it a strange place that the prince should choose that place of all places to linger in, and there they rested till it came to high noon. And at noon Drinian looked up and saw the most beautiful lady he had ever seen, and she stood at the north side of the fountain and said no word, but beckoned to the prince with her hand, as if she bade him to come to her. And she was tall and great, shining and wrapped in a thin garment as green as poison. And the prince stared at her like a man out of his wits, but suddenly the lady was gone. Drinian knew not where, and they too returned to Cair Paravel. It stuck in Drinian's mind that this shining green woman was evil. Drinian doubted very much whether he ought to tell this adventure to the king, but he had little wish to be a blab and a talebearer, and so he held his tongue. But afterward he wished he had spoken, for the next day Prince Rilian rode out alone. That night he came not back, and from that hour no trace of him was ever found in Narnia nor any neighboring land, and neither his horse nor his hat nor his cloak nor anything else was ever found. Then Drinian, in the bitterness of his heart, went to Caspian and said, Lord King, slay me speedily as a great traitor, for by my silence I have destroyed your son. And he told him the story. Then Caspian caught up a battle axe and rushed upon the Lord Drinian to kill him. And Drinian stood still as a stalk for the death blow. But when the axe was raised, Caspian suddenly threw it away and cried out, I have lost my queen and my son. Shall I lose my friend also? And he fell upon the Lord Drinian's neck and embraced him, and both wept, and their friendship was not broken. Such was the story of Rilian. And when it was over, Jill said, I bet that serpent and that woman were the same person. True, true, we think the same as you, hooted the owls. But we don't think she killed the prince, said Glimfeather, because no bones. We don't know she didn't, said Scrub. Aslan told Pole we know she didn't, said Scrub. Aslan told Pole he was still alive somewhere. That almost makes it worse, said the oldest owl. It means she has some use for him and some deep scheme against Narnia. Long, long ago, at the very beginning, a white witch came out of the north and bound our land in snow and ice for 100 years, and we think this may be some of the same crew. Very well, then, said Scrub. Pole and I have got to find this prince. Can you help us? Have you any clue, you two? Said Glimfeather. Yes, said Scrub. We know we've got to go north, and we know we've got to reach the ruins of a great city. At this there was a greater to-hooing than ever, and noises of birds shifting their feet and ruffling their feathers, and then all the owls started speaking at once. They all explained how very sorry they were that they themselves could not go with the children on their search for the lost prince. You want to travel by day, and we'd want to travel by night, they said. It wouldn't do. One or two owls added that even here in the ruined tower it wasn't nearly so dark as it had been when they began, and that the Parliament had been going on quite long enough. In fact, the mere mention of a journey to the ruined city of giants seemed to have damped the spirits of those birds, but Glimfeather said, if they want to go that way into Ettinsmoor, we must take them to one of the Marshwiggles. They're the only people who can help them much. True, true, do, said the owls. Come on, then, said Glimfeather. I'll take one who'll take the other. It must be done tonight. It will, as far as the Marshwiggles, said another owl. Are you ready? Said Glimfeather to Jill. I think Pole's asleep, said Scrub. Chapter 5 is called Puddleglum. The first word is Jill. So let me know if you want to keep going. This chapter is... Daniel, are you awake? Daniel, not awake. JJ, you awake? The boys are both out. So I think that is probably where we need to stop it for tonight. So the next chapter is chapter 5, Puddleglum, and the first word is Jill. And we will stop there for tonight. And I hope you're enjoying the story. I hope I don't have too much of these owls left to speak because it's like hurting my voice. But we'll see how that goes. And I hope that y'all have a great night. Kimberly, do you have anything else to add? Yep, Jill and the boys are both asleep, so this is the perfect time to stop. Oh wait, we've got a comment. Just a minute. Aww. Okay, sorry, Becca. All right. We love you. Good night. God bless you. Bye.